The Sykes-Pickavant story. 100 years traveling along a long and winding road. With ups and downs, twists and turns, but still going strong in 2025. A timeline from sbarchive.org. Let's set the scene for the start of this story. In January 1921, the first car tax discs are introduced. Unemployment is a serious issue and tops 1 million in February, peaking at 2 million by June. The Ottoman Empire has been dissolved, and nations discuss the problems that arise. The Irish War of Independence is underway, but in May, the province of Northern Ireland is created. Although the war formally ends on July 9th, on the following day fighting between Protestants and Catholics in Belfast result in many deaths and the destruction of 200 homes. Airships are still viewed as the future of air transport, and in June the world's largest, the R-38 makes its maiden flight from Cardington. It explodes 2 months later, killing 44 crew. In September, Ernest Shackleton sets sail on his last expedition. On the 11th day of the 11th month, the British Legion launches the first Poppy Day. In the aftermath of the Great War, and the continuing turmoil at home and overseas, J.W. Pickavant register a new company on May 30th. It was 1921. For a few years the horse had been sharing the busy streets of British towns with clattering electric trams and the first horseless carriages. As with so many other innovations, wartime demands had stimulated the development of the motor vehicle. People had quickly come to accept motor vans and lorries, motor buses and charabancs, motor ambulances and fire engines, along with a rapidly increasing number of private motor cars. This fundamental change in transport took place at an alarming rate, and it was soon quite clear that the petrol engine was taking over from the horse, man's prime mover for centuries. Engineers and carriage builders became the first motor manufacturers, turning out a wide variety of different vehicles from small workshops. Substantial importation of Henry Ford's Model T stimulated the early British makers. Mass production techniques were used by Morris, Austin, and others to meet the demand for reliable cars and trucks at prices which made high sales possible. Fuel had been supplied in 2-gallon cans, available from your chemist or ironmonger. Now came the curbside petrol pump fed by our giant Thornycroft trucks adapted to carry 200 gallons at a time. Behind the pumps there developed the first motor repair shops, often operated by bicycle dealers and ex-blacksmiths. Spare parts, tools, and equipment were scarce, but these early pioneers achieved near miracles with their main resources, ingenuity and enthusiasm. The garage trade had been born, and with its inception began the Sykes-Pickavant story.
Following the grim reality of the Great War, the 1920s roared into life with the exuberance of the Jazz Age. Henry Ford started UK manufacturing at Trafford Park prior to the war. But by the early 20s, capacity limitations led to the acquisition of a new site at Dagenham. In Egypt, Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, and in 1927, the American Charles Lindbergh made the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis. Although Lindbergh attracted huge publicity and is often mistakenly credited with the first transatlantic flight, two Mancunians, John Alcock and Arthur Brown, in fact made the first transatlantic flight 8 years earlier in 1919 in a Vickers Vimy, a Great War stringbag bomber. By 1929, Wall Street was heading for a crash and the world was facing the Depression. Cinema films were still silent in the early 20s, with classics like Nosferatu in 1922 and Charlie Chaplin in The Gold Rush in 1925. The Jazz Singer in 1927, with Al Jolson, introduced the talkies.
In Birmingham, two brothers, Justin and Marcus Mendelsohn, came into contact with the motor trade when their family furniture manufacturing business began making timber frame and wood panel coachwork to be fitted to Austin chassis. They saw the opportunities presented by the burgeoning garage trade, and early in 1921 their activity brought them into contact with Jack Pickavant. He was a salesman from Southport, Lancashire, with experience in chemical and hardware products for the motorist. Editor's note: Jack Pickavant, who went by the nickname himself, served in the Royal Flying Corps in the Great War. There's evidence that he first started in business immediately after the war in 1918-19. In addition, there are entries in early motor show catalogues that show both J.W. Pickavant and himself taking show stands alongside each other. It was decided to form a company to market motor accessories, spares and tools under the style of J.W. Pickavant and Company. The other director was, unusually in those times, a lady, Miss M. Baker, who had worked previously with Jack Pickavant and who handled the administrative side of the business for the next quarter century. The new company needed salesmen, and Jack Pickavant remembered a close friend who had managed a retail store in Lytham St Anne's just across the River Ribble from his native Southport. This was Joe Sykes, who in the summer of 1921 became the Northern Counties salesman for the new company. The product range was initially based on accessories and components for the Ford Model T and other popular vehicles. The first Pickavant salesman called on garages, service stations, and engineering shops, as well as the early motor trade wholesalers. The range they offered included such lines as Hassler shock absorbers, Hoodco transmission covers, Bradwell ignition testers, Holleyinks easy starters, and so on. In addition to many proprietary lines, J.W. Pickavant organized the production of an increasing number of tools and accessories under their trade name Quicko. Throughout the 1920s, these aids to safer, cheaper, and more reliable motoring were exhibited at the annual motor shows at Olympia. The enterprising company even had its own traveling display vans to support the efforts of the salesmen.
The Great Depression lasted through the entire decade. Despite this, Ford introduced the Model Y in 1932, Prefect in 1938, and Anglia in 1939. The BBC began regular TV broadcasting from Alexander Palace in 1936, testing both the 240-line Baird system and the 405-line EMI Marconi system that would later be adopted. The outbreak of war curtailed further broadcasting. 1936 also saw 200 unemployed men start the Jarrow March from Jarrow to London. This was just one of a number of protest marches prompted by the unemployment and poverty of the times. In the summer of 1939, the Anglo-Saxon ship Burial at Sutton Hoo was discovered, and the treasures stored in a London underground tunnel for the duration of the war. Cinema-goers were haunted by All Quiet on the Western Front in 1930, then terrified by King Kong in 1933, and cheered on Chaplin in Modern Times 1936.
During the 1930s, the Apkaway brand was developed, and later the Pickavant brand started to appear on the rapidly developing tool range. Interestingly, it was during this decade that the first piece of diagnostic equipment appeared, the Apkaway electrical systems tester for dynamos, starters, ignition, and wiring. In 1939, J.F. Sykes was incorporated, and their first catalogue was published, mainly featuring American tools such as the KD service tools and Van Chrome pullers. Already some overlaps were emerging between the Pickavant and Sykes tool ranges. Some of these tool designs are recognizable as very similar to products that continued in the range right through to the turn of the millennium and beyond.
At the new Ford Dagenham plant, production switched to military vehicles, whilst the redundant Trafford Park factory turned to making Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, many going to the local Avro factory where Lancasters were built. No new civilian cars or trucks were built during this time, and the make do and mend approach was needed to keep pre-war models roadworthy. In 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland and World War II broke out. In 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the United States entered the war. During 4 months of summer 1940, the RAF fought back against relentless bombing raids by the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain. In the cinema, audiences were thrilled by blockbusters like The Wizard of Oz, 1939, and Gone with the Wind, 1939. Whilst the looming presence of Citizen Kane dominated the big screen in 1941, alongside Bogey in The Maltese Falcon. Casablanca, again starring Bogey, saw him dodging Nazis in 1942. Playing a very different role, Chaplin told the ominous and perceptive story of The Great Dictator in 1940, a film that still carries a topical message 85 years later.
The war obviously curtailed product developments, but both companies continued in operation despite key management and personnel being recruited into the war effort. This was the time of make do and mend, and fuel rationing. In 1942, the use of petrol for private vehicles was withdrawn completely. Whilst many cars were mothballed for the duration, those vehicles that were kept on the road needed constant repair and maintenance to keep them roadworthy. For the time being, the two companies would have to trade on their pre-war catalogues and ranges.